Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. This is Gemini Brett. Happy eclipsing to you. And yeah, I mean happy, which is a choice, right? This is an image of the last blood moon that aligned. It was May 26, 2021, as you can read above. That was an instrumental version of a song I wrote some years ago called Scorpion. And this was an amazing sight to behold. I was able to watch it from right here in this room. I had cameras going in a couple places and I was running around and in that way, not really doing the eclipse, right? So what is it to do an eclipse? How do you do that? What should we do? Should we hide under a rock? Was it the worst thing I could have possibly done to not only like let the light of this blood moon strike my rods and cones, but also magnify it in a lens and take that in, right? These are interesting questions. Where are you in, I guess I could say, eclipse superstition? I'm going to rewind this and just show an image of the moment of the blood moon. This is the Scorpion constellation. So I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but this is Antares. This is the heart of the Scorpion, which is just about to be eclipsed itself. So on December 4th, we have a total solar eclipse at the heart of the Scorpion, Antares, one of the royal stars, one of the Bohemian stars, a magical star, all right? The lunar eclipse, as we will see, is aligned to magical stars itself and Bohemian star as well. So here we are with a lunar eclipse coming tonight with Algol, and then a solar eclipse with Antares. So we're going to need hot water and some tea for this one. So I wanted to start with this eclipse, which has already happened, because of course, every moment is unique, but they're coming from somewhere and going somewhere too. But also just to show that, I mean, if you're looking for like kind of terrifying sky symbolism, how about this? This is the front of the Scorpion. Today, it's usually drawn like as claws, but truthfully, the two bright stars of the scales, I don't doubt they're in frame. This might be Zubin el-Shamali all the way to the right, which is why I hid my camera for a bit. And Zubin el-Janubi, which are like two of the principal stars of the scales constellation, we used to call the scales the claws. And those stars, Zubin el-Shamali and Janubi, respectively, mean the northern and the southern claws of the Scorpion. The Scorpion held the scales, right? So this really isn't the Scorpion's claws, these stars, which mark the front of tropical Sagittarius in our day and age, the beginning of tropical Sagittarius, at the Scorpio-Sagittarius cusp of the tropical zodiac. But they're like that like mouth front part of the Scorpion, right? So what happened this night is I watched a beautiful full moon be swallowed by this Scorpion and turn blood red. Right? This was, again, May 26th of this year. And so we might expect that the Scorpion swallowing the moon and turning red inside the body of the Scorpion is a really terrible and ill and evil omen. And yet here we are surviving. Now that's not true for everyone. In fact, there was somebody in my family who died in a very freaky accident right at this time. Or the solar eclipse that followed on the heels of that lunar eclipse, right? So I want to be respectful. Also, the world is a mess right now. And there's all sorts of Scorpion, stinger, heart things and power dynamics going down. And there's all sorts of, with the nodes in the tropical signs of Gemini and Sagittarius, all sorts of issues with truth right now. And we're going to get to a star with this coming eclipse, which might also show its symbolism in the current events. So let's move along. I do want to share some astronomy. If you were at the lunar eclipse forecast I gave for the Astrology Hub's Inner Circle last night, you've seen a lot of these slides. So, but you know, redundancy is built into every great space mission. And I'm going to go, I think, a little bit be darker today. Because as you saw, the title for this thing was like a blood moon. Oh, at the demon star with a baby eater or something like that. It's like, what are you talking about? It's so heavy. Yeah, what are people talking about? Why would you call that star the demon star? Why would you call that thing? Right. So let's look into that a little bit. And why the blood moon? So this is not a great image. It didn't create it. And thanks to whoever it did. But an image of the astronomical reason that we suggest the moon turns red when occulted by the Earth shadow. In the umbra of the Earth. I'm wondering about these names now on this slide. I hadn't noticed before. But anyway, the general idea is that there's refraction happening. Some also explain it as like the sunrises and sunsets, which are red as a result of refraction too. They're like basically projected onto the moon. I'm going to track this down and learn a little bit deeper because there's some things on this slide that I've borrowed that I'm not sure if they're right. What I am sure is this. Why do we see the moon turn blood red? Because we have human eyes. Human eyes capable of seeing in our sky through the miracle of the solar eclipse's diamond ring or the lunar eclipse's blood. That soul and spirit, moon and sun are the same size, which is an amazing thing in very local space, this place of Earth, this garden of matter. Why does that matter? It is my feeling that the eclipses are wonderful and powerful reminders of everything. I believe that they, first of all, that the sun, moon, and the earth, that these are the incarnational triad, that the sun is the one and only light, at least from our local perspective. I like an old cosmology that the stars are simply holes in the veil that shields us from the light, and that the sun is the big hole because it's the one that we're closest to. That so what sunlight is actually is one light. And the reason why the sun's in Scorpio now isn't because of the sun, it's because of the earth. It's Earth orbiting the sun that gives us the experience of the sun moving through the stars and moving through the signs. And that the moon is soul is this incarnational device that reflects that one light in a unique way that will never, ever repeat. For me, that's what a soul is. A soul cannot be some small piece of spirit of the one and only thing, because the one and only thing is indivisible. And so that the mechanism is this, that one thing is not divided, but rather reflected in its entirety, but in a unique way that will never repeat. And that, I feel, is a soul. And the soul and matter is you. So spirit is everything, and therefore it's inherently nothing. It can't grow because it's already everything, and yet it will never stop doing so because of miracles like you, which are spirit reflected through soul here into matter. Why would you do it? Because here in matter, in a place with the appearance of time and space, there can be growth. And we grow through feeling, which requires a suit with a heart that pumps blood. And so the moon turns blood red in the moment of the lunar eclipse to remind us of this, that here on Earth, in a body that with blood, we have these eyes that can see that spirit and soul are the same size. During a lunar eclipse, we see a month's worth of lunar phases in hours. During a solar eclipse, we see a month's worth of phase shapes in minutes during a total solar eclipse. Now, you don't get every phase, like we don't get the perfect square in the lunar eclipse. We'll, at the end of this flow, watch one like unfold a little bit more slowly with some beautiful music written specifically for tonight's eclipse, which I hope will help you center into your intention for this magical portal that we are entering, that we have entered, because time happens before time happens. But But importantly, we don't get that perfect square. And during the eclipses, we get some different shapes that you can never see in the beautiful mirror of the moon. But that being said, we also do experience this kind of acceleration, this experience of all of the months worth of phases in the matter of hours for a lunar eclipse or minutes for a solar eclipse. So I want to honor that there's a time machine portal available in eclipses, because in the case of the lunar eclipse, you can do like a month's worth of feeling, healing, knowing, and growing in hours if you're willing to go into the shadow to find new light. And so we bring the time machine here, TARDIS, onto the slide. There's another reason for that, because what I learned, maybe it was the last lunar eclipse that I photographed or the one before, is that the phases also happen in reverse. In other words, the moon is full, but as the moon goes to become new, that's the center of the eclipse, she shows you the phases that we see in a waxing moon, right? So like the last phase before the blood moon, which will be like, just a crescent, is not the waning crescent, but the waxing crescent. So we're going from full and like backwards to new, and then backwards to full again, when the light is reborn from the shadow. That's the most important truth of an eclipse. Like the symbolism is quite clear. The light is lost. It is shadowed. It is covered. And then it was reborn. Is it the same light? Is it the same moon that comes out of this thing? Is it the same moon or the same sun that comes back from having been occulted from the moon during the solar eclipse? Probably. Question mark, question mark. Probably actually is what you make of it. Now, I've been saying blood moon, but can you see this little bit of white in this graphic? Oh, thank you, NASA Scientific Visualization Studio. These would be universal times for this tonight's eclipse. Blood moon is typically a word that we reserve for total lunar eclipses. And you'll see here, almost total lunar eclipse. And it is just almost 97%, a little bit more of the moon will be shadowed by the earth. So a little bit will be left, but not enough for the moon to not turn red. Clouds are really coming in here in California, which is making me a bit sad, because I'm sure hoping to see this tonight. If I want to, it's going to require a lot of layers and blankets. That last eclipse I showed, I literally photographed it from in these windows. We woke up the 6-year-old and let him experience now his second lunar eclipse. Visually, his second total lunar eclipse. And we were able to stay in the warm house and watch the windows, because that eclipse was in the Scorpion, who in the Northern Hemisphere walks the land. Right? Tropical Sagittarius, the lowest sign in the Northern Hemisphere, along with Capricorn. Well, tonight's eclipse is in the very last degrees of tropical Taurus, which are very northern degrees of the zodiac. And in the Northern Hemisphere, that means there, right? Like in Hawaii, this eclipse will literally go straight overhead, and that kind of those latitudes, tropical latitudes. So I'm going to have to gear up and get out and probably lay on the trampoline and just watch up. That's my plan. I won't be hiding. In the right coffin with all the right talismans and amulets above it. That's just not my approach. I've been and experienced many eclipses intentionally and without. It's not that my life is not without significant challenges, but for the most part, I've felt in those times when I come to eclipse, they offer me a boost. They offer me an opportunity to go a little, like to do some serious like soul work, but also offers significant rebirthing. So the time machine here, not only because you have this time portal, but also because the phases go backwards. So it's a wonderful time to kind of go back and clean up some things that have not been finished in your life that are kind of like holding on into the energetic center. If you've seen me talk about eclipses, you've heard me use this metaphor, which I love. It's like going into a blacklit room and suddenly you see these like stains in your clothes that you can't see in regular light. and then it ends and you can't see the stains anymore. But now that you know they are there, you're going to clean the shirt? If the answer is yes, eclipse ceremony is for you. So almost total lunar eclipse. In fact, the longest almost total lunar eclipse for 1,000 years. I've been seeing, so many, hey, look at this on social media, and been getting emails about it. This is the longest eclipse for a millennia. It's actually not. That happened a few years ago. This is the longest partial lunar eclipse for 1,000 years. You read all about it here. Earth Sky, a place I highly recommend you subscribe to. Wonderful information. So 3 hours and 28 minutes. Some have suggested that means the energies of these eclipses will last for 3.5 years. I've seen that test out actually a little bit in like looking at natives' charts and significant things that happen in their life. But it's also one of these things in astrology, all of these things in astrology where you're like, really, where does that come from? Is it real? Should I just believe that as fact, or do I need to go check it out a bit? Like the last partial lunar eclipse that stretched longer happened on February 18th, 1440. So maybe we should tune back into that time and see what was going down. Would they be beheading the children then? Wait, why would I say that? Oh, let's get back to that. Okay, so here's the chart for this almost blood moon. But the moon will turn, as it does during a total lunar eclipse, that coppery orange red, if clouds allow you to see it and it is nighttime. So where will this eclipse be seen, you may ask? How do we know it's an eclipse? And the answer is nodes. Like if you look at a chart, why is not every full moon a lunar eclipse? Why is not every new moon a solar eclipse? Did I just say solar twice? Anyway, I think you're with me. And the answer is that the moon's orbital path is not the same as the Earth's. It's a different plane. The Earth's orbital path, which we call the ecliptic, we experience as the path the sun takes through the heavens during the course of the year. And that is called the ecliptic. It is the center of the zodiac. It is shown here in gold. I call it the circle of spirit because it's where the sun lives, where I call this silver circle the circle of soul, or silver because it's where the moon lives. The moon's path separates from that of the sun's by about 5 degrees, both north and south. And where the moon's path crosses the sun's path from the south to the north, we call it the north lunar node. And from the north to the south lunar node. And that happens every month. And this is why there's so much images of dragons and serpents with the eclipses, because every month the moon snakes above and below the path of the sun. We call this north node the dragon's head, and the south node the dragon's tail. So this image shown is the image of a new moon, and helps us see why not every new moon is a no moon. Wait, why most new moons are no moons? Because when the moon aligns with the sun in the same zodiac degree, but does not occult the sun, right? Solar eclipse, and you happen to be on Earth in one of the few places where that solar eclipse will allow you to experience visible shadow play. Typically, a new moon means no moon. The moon is under the beams of the sun. And that's kind of like the day before the new moon the day after the new moon. So there's so many prophecies about the moon disappearing for 3 days, right? And it basically does every month, except during solar eclipses. If you happen to be that place on Earth, which is like the screen of a metaphor I will share, where the projector is the sun and the moon is this little shadow puppet that comes through. And it's not like the shadow puppet shadows the entire screen, right? So the moon only casts a small shadow on the Earth. And so total eclipses, which do cast, shadow, can only be seen in some places of the Earth, right? The lunar eclipse is different. Lunar eclipses are seen everywhere it's night. And so this slide I always feel is backwards. It's from my favorite eclipse sandbox online. I got to be kind of quick because I have a session here in 42 minutes. It's a magical number. So I probably won't get to it in this video, maybe later, maybe even tomorrow. I'll bring you to moonblink.info. You can go there. It's a great site and explore the Saros series of this lunar eclipse, the family that this eclipse belongs to. See what was happening in your life when that family came around, which would have been 18.03 years ago, 36.06 years ago. 54 years ago. It's really interesting to track these cycles, and we can look back at when was that family of eclipses born? Same thing for the solar eclipse coming here in 2 weeks. Like, what family does it belong to? What was happening when it was last around? When in time was that eclipse family born? Oftentimes we'll find some story in the first eclipse of a family. And solar eclipse Saros series lasts for like 1,300 years. They come around every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. That is the rhythm of the dragon's heartbeat. So I would love to explore that. Hopefully I can find some time, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. I mean, maybe tonight, because I'm planning on staying up late to catch this eclipse. So everywhere that's shown here in light will be able, if clouds allow, to see this eclipse if you are willing to go outside and receive. Because anywhere it is nighttime, the full moon is above the horizon and the eclipse is seen, covered by the shadow of Earth. So the only distinction between some of these places is for some of them, the moon will already be in the midst of the eclipse while it rises. In some places, it will set before the eclipse, this 3.5-hour experience ends. It's basically centered here in the Pacific above like kind of Hawaii, Samoa zone. This is how close to total this eclipse is, right? This image I found from Moonblink that they found from NASA. I mean, we can't even see. I think this number 0.9742 is showing us that 97.4% of the moon will be occulted by the umbra, the shadow of Earth's rocky bodies. There's just a tiny little bit of crescent will be there. And this is, I think, a northern hemisphere image. It'd be interesting to see like that eclipse in Sagittarius in May. The last moments of the eclipse, there was just like a crescent bow facing straight towards the heavens. This one looks like it's going to be facing straight towards hell. The opposite experience would be happening in the southern hemisphere, by the way. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. It's also going to be harder to tell because the moon's going to be pretty close to above my head. And when you're looking up, it's hard to say if left is up or right is down, you see. So this eclipse actually aligns close enough to the lunar nodes, right? Imagine a new moon meeting here. Well, now the moon is going to be in front of the sun, not above or below the sun, you see? So solar eclipses have to meet within 18.5 degrees of either south or north lunar node for an eclipse to happen. Maybe. An eclipse will definitely happen if a new moon aligns within 15.3 degrees. And it will be a partial. Now, if it's a new moon is 10 degrees, it might be total or partial. Full moons have actually, interestingly, a tighter criterion. So for a lunar eclipse, for a full moon to be a lunar eclipse, the moon has to oppose the sun, that's full moon, right? Within 12.25 degrees of the node. For it to maybe be a lunar eclipse, within 9.5 degrees, it's definitely going to be eclipse. And if you know magic, number magic, like 6 to 9.5 should interest you for a definite partial. For it to be total, it's got to be within 6. So 3.75 to 6. If it's within 3.75 of full moon within the nodes, it will definitely be a total lunar eclipse. This one is 4 degrees and change, so it's in this range, and it's near total. So near total that it's the longest partial lunar eclipse for a millennia, and since 1440. One of the reasons is this Lilith. So it's interesting that astrology has come to call this dark foci of the Earth moon orbital reality, black moon Lilith. So, you know, why was that planet named Neptune? Why Pluto? Why Eris? Whoa, I'm watching a squirrel awfully close to the cat on the fence. Seems like a bad plan. Oh my gosh. Sorry, we're gonna have to watch this one play out. Cat stares at squirrel, now looks away slyly as if he does not care. Squirrel, you have to know there's an eclipse tonight. Have you been looking at your charts? As soon as I said eclipse, he started climbing down the fence, but he's still there. I'm so surprised to see my cat Chase, like, not react, not hunt, but just observe. He must be an animal lover like me. Okay, back to this, sorry. Imagine the squirrel is orbiting the cat. Well, orbits, my friends, are not circular, they are elliptical. So what Lilith is one of the foci of the moon-Earth ellipse. Circles have one center, ellipses have two foci. Earth is much more massive than the moon, and this results in one of the two foci of the moon-Earth situation being within Earth's body. It's not the center of Earth, and that creates a very interesting wobbling thing. All right. But the other foci is just like this dark point in space. There's no actual physical body there, but it's a very significant point of what I prefer to call Earth-Moon love. And this is a very exaggerated image of the moon's orbital path. If we think of moon orbiting Earth, where really they're dancing together in their own partnered choreography around the sun, but this is a good model to understand these things. When we look through the point we've come to call true black moon Lilith on the chart, we are looking towards the lunar apogee, which means far from Earth. And that means small, dim. When we are looking exactly opposite true black moon Lilith in an astrology chart, we are looking at the lunar perigee, where the moon is closest to the Earth, and that means big, like literally apparently bigger. We've come to call it supermoon, and brighter and faster. The moon moves on average like 13 1/3 degrees per day through Earth's zodiac. Here it can be at like 15 and change, sometimes even 16 degrees per day. Over here, we have slow moon. So do you think we're going to see in this longest partial lunar eclipse of a millennia, moon fast or moon slow? And the answer, of course, is moon slow, right? Because the moon is going to more slowly move through Earth's shadow, extending the period of the eclipse, because tonight's near total lunar eclipse is a micro moon, which some have come to call these smaller moons, which are literally apparently smaller in the sky than the average sized moon, much smaller than what we've called the super moon, the perigee moon. Okay. So it's hard to notice this. Like, I'm wanting to create devices that will help me compare relative moon size during the course of the month. As moon gets close to Earth, that's opposite Lilith, or far from Earth, that's conjoined Lilith. And so we'll see a chart again, and I will point out to you at the time that the moon, the lunar eclipse tonight in Taurus is pretty close to Lilith, true black moon Lilith, who's just over the cusp in Gemini. So what have you heard about Lilith? Baby eater. Now that's really heavy. So a sip of tea and a prayer. A moon is with Lilith every month. Far, dim, small, slow. But when moon is full, only we get these micro moons like once a year. Sometimes kind of twice a year. Micro full moon, far full moon, dim full moon, slow full moon, distant. Well, far from Earth is closer to something else. For me, earth is matter and far away is spirit. Now, spirit is everywhere. It is here. It is in your breath. It is in every eyelash, right? Spirit is the all. But when we come into matter, we are inherently and purposefully, I will say, disconnected from that knowledge again, because here in matter, we can experience this time-space thing that allows for, doesn't necessitate, allows for deep feeling, deep healing, great knowing, and knowing is growing, and this is how spirit grows. It's an option here in the earth realm, in the garden. So if you know about Lilith, the story is that she was designed at the same time as Adam. And they were designed to be, wife and husband, and they weren't into it. And Lilith, it says in this text from like the 8th century, when her name in that way was first introduced in one of the Kabbalistic texts, that Lilith said, I do not want to lie underneath him. Usually people these days lay out the next line, which is, and Adam said, I do not want to lie underneath her. They wanted to be equals. And apparently that couldn't happen. Why? You can make love like on your sides. Anyway, that's what it said. And so Lilith splits and she leaves the garden. That wasn't what she was designed for. So the designer freaks out and sends the team of archangels or archons to track Lilith down and say, hey, it's time to get back to the garden. That's where you're meant to be. And Lilith said no, but she made a trade. And I can't tell all of it, nor do I really know all the intricacies, but basically she said that she will give back 100 children every day if she is permitted to stay in what I'll call, let me call it the wilderness. And then so the deal was accepted. That's what I've come to understand. There's many writings since and lots of things we can do about this. So what do you mean give 100 children back? Well, Lilith, and this probably reaches back further into Mesopotamia, where there was a specific demon, actually like a specific type of demon called the Lilith, who is said to eat children in the middle of the night. What? So even middle of the night, I'm thinking not sun. Now, not sun does not mean moon, but if I had to choose one luminary and I'm hearing middle of the night, it's moon, not sun, right? The garden, what is that? That is earth, friends. Quite clearly, I think. Not the not garden, that is not earth. So what is not earth? It's before incarnation. Not to say that you couldn't live on another planet. Maybe you currently are in another way, or have, or will again, or who knows, right? But here you are on Earth. And so I would say not Earth. It's either before and after, or parts of you that aren't actually here. So higher self might be a word. And I think Lilith accesses that. I think Lilith is that part of us that desires to stay connected to the all, connected to the one, to not feel separated by bones and skin, which make me different than the person in the other room, or even right here next to me. We can share breath, but we can do our best to share body, and sometimes that feels wonderful, right? But we can't actually completely dissolve and be one while we are alive, maybe through spiritual practices, meditation, whatnot, right? So this is a heavy thing to share, but Lilith, astrologically, astronomically, is often aligned to planets in the charts of miscarriages, divorces, abortions. Lilith is very strongly configured to Mars in the Roe versus Wade chart. And I was really significantly educated. There was a year of astrology readings, specifically when I lived in Seattle. Unfortunately, then I was actually sitting with people at my tea table. Like almost all of my readings were, well, half of my readings were in person, and now they're all online. So I could really be with people. The drum came out and all sorts of other things. It was at that time when the name of my business was more than astrology, and it was, still is, but there were other things I could do. And there was a period of my work, which is, I guess the principal venue of my study, because I learned through the wisdom of people who are sitting with me and sharing and talking story and interfacing with the chart, right, and learning astrology in this way. There was a period of my work where I was sitting frequently with women who were having this like retrograde back to a time earlier in their life where they had had an abortion. And yeah, I kind of was quickly led to see that the first thing to do was ask the child's name. And I never got, oh, it was this. It was usually, what are you talking about, right? Like I said, it wasn't a child that was born. And then I'd say, well, is it a boy or a girl? And interestingly, like 80% of the time, their answer came right away. It's a boy. How do you know? And then usually it's like this, girl. Wait, how do I know that? Right? And then the drum would come out and connecting in and like, what is her name? What is her name? Right? Because what I'm seeing is that these are beings who didn't get stuck in the garden, like are choosing to be away from the garden. Do you see how if I feel this is true in this cosmology, that the moon as that device that reflects spirit through soul into earth, that when the moon's far from earth, it wants to stay out and stay like away from the incarnate, like not coming into matter, not yet. And when the moon is really close to earth, it's just excited to come play earth game, and I want to eat and have sex, like feel life, right? Is it really alive right now because it's Taurus Scorpio axis, so why not go for it? Oh, amazing to see like a cat in this beautiful painting by Barrett Biggers that I found online last night, because I'm still looking at my cat on the fence and they look somewhat similar. Anyway, you'll notice there's no squirrel in the art. This cat acted like it. So, and so did Lilith. It said that she was eating babies, which is why that terrible thing was written in the description of this share. And I've wondered if that is actually like these souls in abortion, in miscarriage, or children when they die very young in the crib, who are like get so close to the garden without getting stuck. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to incarnate or a bad thing to be here, so I should be careful with that word stuck. I mean, even in spirit, is there an over and an under? Maybe when we read, I don't want to lie under him, and I don't want to lie under her, it's about that. It's like, I want to be back in spirit where there is no up or down or left and right, and we are just the all, and it's timeless and spaceless and all these things. Maybe, I don't know. What I had noticed is these women, who, and I mean, just my heart was just so open through these experiences because they had abortions at a time when they were very different people. And I mean, it is such a isolating experience, right? It's like you're on your own. I mean, even if you have a really supportive partner, like that is that person's body, the woman's body, right? And the pressures, and I mean, there's no spiritual book of how to do this in a good way or whatever. Like you're on your own, and it's kind of a crash course into awakening, or maybe not, or maybe like a time delayed awakening, or maybe not. But that's what I was experiencing, is like people were having visions and experiences of these souls in dream or whatever. And then I had just seen how, wow, these are like these amazing spirit guides for people. Like these are these souls who came so close, like close enough to Earth and didn't even come in all the way, but enough to like offer the breath of a powerful awakening for, you know, in this case, this woman or men had that experience. So it wasn't the man that's going through the abortion. I'm sorry not to include like the non-binary options here. So please insert the right words where they go. But, you know, I've sat also with men who identified as men who did not have an abortion, but were in experience in a relationship with a woman who had, and now that's kind of catching up to them. And I'm also not trying to make judgments here about whether abortion's right or wrong or any of that. Okay, I'm getting into sensitive territory, but there's no more sensitive territory than saying something like baby eating. And I said it, but I'm not talking about that specifically, right? But it feels to me that this is kind of part of that Lilith principle. It's like keeping us out of matter where we're not here. And there's a genius to that because we're much more fluid in spirit realm, but there's a genius to this because there's opportunity for growth in matter realm. My current cosmology, I've come to accept that really what that is religion. It's at the root of how I connect with clients in astrology. And I'm learning to be okay with that because I came up hating words like religion. Obviously, this is not some organized religion, but we could start a church if you're down. But it's how I'm learning to experience spirit, soul, matter, growth, and learning this from how I connect with the heavens and notice things in charts, right? But I'm also noticing in charts that I want to because they will confirm, you know, this philosophy, cosmology. It's a religion, it's a belief system. All right, so I'm spending more time here than I necessarily should. But what I want to say is like Lilith is not bad. Lilith might be great. I would say Lilith is bad for Earth or getting stuck in the garden. And Lilith is perfect if you want to be out in space, which is a lot closer, I would imagine, to the one and only thing in spirit. Our local example being the many stars and especially the sun, the biggest hole in the veil, the one that we are closest to. And here we are back in the garden. So it's like, dude, sorry. Sorry you couldn't keep that relationship. And he's like, God, I just wish, you know, I could have somebody that's a little bit more like me. Oh, let's just take a rib out of your side. And what? That's interesting magic. I appreciate the Zachariah Sitchin, very, very liberal contemplations, really, which he calls translations of the old Sumerian tablets, to speak of that idea of the rib really being about cloning and basically extraterrestrial forces coming here to create humanity, not coming here for this purpose, but being here like needing helpers, and so creating humans out of whatever primate or advanced primate people were here before they came, and their own DNA, and creating us. I did not plan on speaking about that today. So many have actually looked at the serpent in the garden as DNA itself. I will say, as in all myths with snakes and eating things, it like this Rahu eating the sun or Bakanawa eating the 7 moons, we're talking about eclipses. Because the moon snakes above and below the path of the sun every month. So one willfully left the garden, the other one was kicked out, the other two, and their children and that, right? And they're interesting things to consider. I think it's much more than just some kind of like story or even patriarchal transmission. There's a lot of astrology in those very old scriptures. So as promised, an image of the eclipse chart stripped down now. We just see the full moon, moon opposite sun with the lunar nodes. And as I said before, within 4 degrees, I lied, but within 5. So in that kind of 3 3/4 to 6 range of possibly total, but not total. Why? Because the moon is far from Earth, moon Lilith, and therefore far from Earth's shadow. Right, so far from Earth means slow, so long eclipse, but the shadow only reaches so far into space before it becomes like a pinpoint, you see? So the moon, even though so close to the nodes and therefore close to the plane, is not going to be entirely occulted by Earth's shadow at this time. But will move so slowly that it's the longest near total eclipse for the millennia and all that. All right, so, I mean, you can never do it enough, but I think I've opened at least enough doors in the whole, why the heck did he write baby killer or baby eater in that description above, that will help you contemplate the astronomy of Lilith and apply that to what you know, the Earth and the moon. Yeah, the Earth, the center of the chart, the garden, the moon and the sun to be, and have your own religious experience around it. That's what I suggest. We're going to bring in another point here, which is Algol, a so-called fixed star that lives in our day and age. This changes with precession and therefore not so fixed after all. In our day and age at the 27th degree of tropical Taurus. And so this 27 degree and 14 arc minute geocentrically, center of Earth measured, near total lunar eclipse is with Lilith, on Lilith, they'll say, or sorry, Algol. So close enough to Lilith, right, to be the micro moon, small, but with Algol. And usually people use 1 degree in fixed star work, right? Certainly we're at that criterion. Hello, Algol. Jeez. The Algol rhythm. See, I need to be careful with some of what I say right now, or the algorithm's going to keep this from getting around. By the way, you can help me out in that regard. If you like what you're hearing or don't like it, but feel like it resonates anyway, please hit that like button and share it around, regardless of where you are seeing this thing. All right. The dog just came in. Her name is Isabel, smelling of like a gazillion rosemary plants, which is nice and also overwhelming. All right, and is about to start playing with a loud toy, so she might be excused here. So moon Algol. I want to show you this, all right, which is a nerd list. This is longitude, which you probably know as zodiac degree. Celestial longitude, measured from the 0 degrees Aries point, where the celestial equator is crossed by the ecliptic. It's the node of an Earth-Sun relationship. And hey, Rosemary. I think we're going to let it happen. I hope you're enjoying some dog soundtrack to this thing. Latitude is how far north or south of the ecliptic, in this case, stars are, or the moon, who's so close to the ecliptic, almost 0 latitude. Why? Because at the node, which is where the moon's path crosses the ecliptic, okay? I'll show a picture, it'll make it easier to see. I want you to see that Algol is 22 degrees away from the ecliptic plane. That's 22.5 degrees north latitude. And I brought another star here on the table, and we'll bring it now into the chart. This is Electra, which is one of the stars of the 7 sisters, the Pleiades. And one of the sisters is a dude, and one of them you can't see. But anyway, let's take a peek. Thanks to Stellarium astronomy software, where, by the way, I have supersized the moon in the moment of the middle of the eclipse. And so you can see here just that much crescent will be left. And that's what I was saying is like kind of, it's the bow pointing down towards the ground, which sadly I called hell before. But last time in May, it was where I experienced it, this bow pointing straight up. It was really cool because typically Diana's bow, the moon's bow, always points directly towards the sun. And that wasn't true because of Earth's shadow creating, in a sense, like a false bow. Shouldn't call it false. Like, when we see Apollo's bow, that's a solar eclipse. Anyway, let's stick with the lunar thing now. So here is Algol, and it's the eye of Medusa, who was decapitated by Perseus. So it's often been used, by the way, as kind of a vehicle to express the demonization of the feminine by the patriarchy. And, there really can't be enough of those symbols, because look at what's happening in this world. But if you learn the myths, first of all, the Gorgon Medusa was made this way, not by the patriarchy, but by Athena or Minerva, by goddess of wisdom. Now, Athena was born out of the skull of Zeus, so maybe she's actually just the patriarchy's brainchild. It's like, honor that. And maybe strategy and wisdom are actually, well, I gotta be careful there, but the other side may be more linear than curvy, or nocturnal than diurnal. No, more diurnal than nocturnal. I prefer to use those terms. But let me just say, importantly, Perseus went and achieved this mission with the assistance of Athena. So it's interesting that Athena both turned Medusa, this queen of Ethiopia's head, into serpents, but then also sent an agent later to decapitate her. I think importantly, and I wish I could show it over here, is one of the hoofs of Pegasus. This is what happened. Medusa was split when she died, her head came off, and then Pegasus was born out of her. So I feel that truly, like, Pegasus is the butterfly, and that this queen, Medusa, was a caterpillar, not knowing it, and that the kind of Gorgon Medusa, serpent-headed eyes turning folks to stones, breath that could, paralyze you, that was like the goo of this cocoon of the transformation. Now, Pegasus wasn't the only thing born. I encourage you to go back and read the tales, which have been told in many different ways over time. But importantly, Perseus cut Medusa's head off to help his mommy. And I say it that way very intentionally, his mommy, to protect her from an evil king. Her dad was an evil king who almost killed her when Perseus was in her womb. And she did not want to be royal or anything to do with royalty. So when a different king was full of love, when he saw her face and needed her to be his queen, Perseus went on a quest to prevent that by cutting off the Gorgon's head, which this evil king needed as some trophy. But really, he just sent Perseus on a fool's errand to get him out of the way so he could take his mom and put her on this throne that she did not want to sit on. So cutting the head off of anything, we can call that evil or whatever, but the story is clearly, friends, not about the patriarchy cutting the head off of the feminine. And how often actually are we saying in the spiritual traditions we want to come more into the heart and out of the head? So isn't that a beheading? Maybe these snakes are all these damn thoughts that I can't get, especially the snaky ones, like, are the myths simply literal? And do you know what the first thing he did with that head before he saved his mom from that evil fate of becoming a queen to a lame king? Before he turned that king to stone, he first turned a sea monster, its head is down here at the bottom, Cetus, to stone. When he flew by on the back of Pegasus and saw this beautiful woman who was in chains on a sacrificial altar for that sea monster to come, her name Andromeda. She had chained herself there, by the way, to save her people. Lots of beautiful and powerful and important dots within the constellations of these myths. And if we only look at one star, we might miss the whole thing. So yes, the moon is aligned to Algol by degree, and some astrologers have shown that this so-called demon star is associated with beheadings. Alzheimer is shown in that way. Is that a beheading? Do we have beheadings all around us now? How about, I'm looking down, by the way, at recess at an elementary school. All those kids, well, I'll walk Izzy down there later and probably see them much more. They're all wearing masks. We can't see their faces. Is that a beheading? So this eclipse at Algol, for me, like the symbolism is there. Okay, let me try to like take a breath, tone it down a little bit. Why is Algol the demon star? Before I go there, I just want to honor here that if you look at this moon, if you have the courage, and I suggest you do if it's available in your sky, the clouds, it's not happening here, it feels. What you will see is not an eclipse with Algol. Like you can find Algol there, it's a very beautiful star, but you'll actually can follow Perseus's foot, who stands on the Pleiades. And just notice how close the moon is to the Pleiades, right? So this is latitude. Algol 22.5 degrees away from the ecliptic, which is this yellow band, the band of the zodiac, where Electra is a few degrees away, so right there, all right? So Alcyone, Atlas, Maya, I mean, these beautiful trophy, these beautiful stars of the Pleiades, which, you know, many traditions, I mean, Hopi, Hawaiian, Lakota, I mean, there's many different traditions that say that that is where we come from. And in the Lakota tradition, this Pleiades marked the beginning of what is known as the sacred hoop, which include a lot of stars. Only one is on the screen, which is Capella. Over here, we get Castor and Pollux, and then Procyon and Sirius and Regal, the foot of Orion here, who these days we show hunting the bull. But the Lakota star knowledge calls that the sacred hoop, and they say it's where our souls come from. So what will happen is this moon is, yes, going to move through the Algol degree as it's eclipsed, but the light will be reborn here as the moon is cruising and aligning with the Pleiades and entering the sacred hoop where we are told our souls come from. That to me is a powerful thing. So let's not get lost on like the delineations of beheading and demon stars alone. I've brought in Pallas Athena and in Latin Minerva to just see if they had alignments. Because again, it is Minerva or Pallas Athena. Here she is at the Library of Congress in DC holding the scroll of all wisdom, and Medusa's head on her brooch. And her shield, the shield that was actually lent to Perseus to behead that Gorgon by looking not into her eyes, which would turn you to stone, but rather by the reflection in a mirror. Athena, once known as the spear shaker. Huh. Sounds like Shakespeare. Anyway, these are myths we're not, or mythologies or cosmologies we're not meant to get into today. At geminibrett.com/offerings, you will find many things. And at the very bottom of that page, you will find a link to this podcast episode I recorded in September of 2015. It's only one of my old podcast episodes that always had live music where I played on it. I played saxophone because the first recording with a friend of mine on saxophone was eclipsed. So then I had to record music that night and later overdub the story, which I had initially told live. But the first like half an hour is like a kind of deep dive into the Medusa story. And then I talk about all sorts of weird things and eclipses in the end. So I encourage you to have a listen or go back to older sources and really tune into the many pieces of this Medusa, Perseus, Pegasus, Andromeda. Oh, I mean, they just goes on and on, so many characters. It's one of the most powerful stories that can help us understand what it is to be human. Don't look up. Never look at an eclipse. Hide under a rock. You know, I mean, again, the world is in a tricky place. Things do go down around eclipses. People die. People are born and come to life. right? Eclipses are real. They are magical portals, and I am convinced that they are part of the incarnational mechanism. And I wouldn't suggest you don't look up. I'd rather suggest that you do and receive that light. I wonder, some say if sorry, I just need to write a text because I'm going to be late here. Some say, like, you were told not to look at eclipses because this was just the priest trying to help you not go blind. Like my mom, when she was a kid, was told with her peers not to go near this lake because it had water moccasins, which, wait, water shoes? Anyway, water serpents. They were telling her in an eclipse story. Right, like don't go into the lake or you'll get the snake, but they just didn't want the kids to drown. Right, and so some have said that the priests of old told us not to look at eclipses because they knew that if you look at a solar eclipse you'll go blind, right, if you're not looking through the onyx. And so they were just trying to help the people, right? That's like the modern scientist who doesn't honor anything about magic. Now, that doesn't explain why you would also be told not to look at a lunar eclipse. You don't go blind when you look at moon reflecting spirits, sunlight to earth, matter, the garden, you see. That's the moonlight, which is sunlight reflected, and sunlight off of earth, off of the moon back, in the case of earth shine, can help us tune into the light without going blind. I wonder sometimes, often, if we were told not to look at eclipses because when you do, mysteries are revealed in your language and the types of mysteries that the priests tried to keep to themselves. So I would say do look up, but it's not actually why I chose to share this slide, nor is this thing, which is where I got this from when I did a quick search online. I had seen Don't Look Up shared in a Facebook group earlier today, actually at Mighty Networks. And I was like, what? And the story is kind of fascinating, especially for an astrologer. Let me go back a slide though. Because it's like they are seeing this terrible thing, a comet's going to come destroy the earth, and they're off telling people, Leonardo DiCaprio in a very out of focus Jennifer Garner, like they need to warn the president, and nobody believes them, and they just kind of laugh them off while the whole world is going to go through like an earth-ending cataclysmic apocalypse. Nobody wants to even look at it. They're trying to monetize the whole thing. That's what I got in a very short preview of the movie that will come out, I guess, in the Eclipse Cauldron still. I don't know. So this article, Don't Look Up, is a climate change movie in disguise. And check this out, right? We are the freaking comet, people. Awful. I'm not saying that humanity does not need to change its ways and that we need to remember we are not just humans, we are also earthlings and need to participate intelligently, consciously with our earth mother, for our bones are her stones, and it is certainly time we get in line, right? But this idea that we are the virus, this is what is being promoted since you were a child. Or sorry, if you're my elder, since later in life, and then through your children, who we are programming in school to believe not only in the great virus that we all have to mask ourselves from, but that we are the virus. We are the freaking comet, people, being promoted by the billionaires who fly around in their private jets to places where they get to make some like a power play, eclipsey, shadowy rules that will keep us locked away and eating crickets for the rest of our lives. All right, enough said there. But no, I want to go back. So sorry if that's a little much. And so I say that in my own channel, right? Which probably will be deleted as a result. But I want to like share those statements, not in when I'm kind of holding space for groups of seekers, and I'm rather biased and opinionated, and I'm a card-carrying Scorpio, though I'm calling myself Gemini Brett for my ascendant and my moon. Oh, speaking of my ascendant, Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, was rising when I was born. It reminds me to just interrupt myself and to talk about something cooler. Okay, this was an amazing experience. The day before, I had walked up this road with the dog early in the morning to see if this comet Neowise thing, the first comet to be named after a robot, by the way, because the tradition is to name a comet after its discoverer, and comet Neowise was discovered by a Neowise device on a satellite. And I had heard, like, all of a sudden, hey, this thing's maybe visible. And I walked up, you know, and even with street lights, saw the comet in the sky over this house. I was like, oh my gosh. And so the next day I went here. I had been planning to go here anyway. And this ring, actually, which was a celebration of Venus with Aldebaran here, and now then has a comet put onto it. So I asked this wonderful talisman creator to help me honor this vision. This is the head of the bull. The Pleiades here sits on the bull's back. And then I call this Venus at the third eye with comet Neowise in the northern sky. Why I wanted to show that and this is because perhaps the reason why this star was called the demon star. I honor this theory, and it comes from Randall Carlson, who I think I first heard about through Graham Hancock. Well, you know, that's not true. I heard about Randall Carlson before that, but he does make a very significant appearance in Magicians of the Gods, which is a very interesting text that Graham Hancock wrote as a follow-up with much new information from his just classic eye-opener, Fingerprints of the Gods, that had been written 20 years before. And in Fingerprints, Graham maybe first introduced this idea that, for him, in his words, I mean, that we are a species with amnesia. And he, like anyone with eyes open who are looking at the evidence, sees that there was a pre-Diluvian culture here on Earth, as it is often called. Now, Quackademia is not going to look at that because you heard the word Diluvian, which means the flood. And anytime you start talking about the flood, which isn't only in the Bible, but in global myths from all over the world, in almost every tradition, right? Anytime you say the flood, it's over because it is creationism versus scientism, and it's one or the other. And there was no flood because that's in the Bible, and you must be a religious zealot if you talk about these things. And no, the earth, yes, there's the water has risen over millennia, but it's been a very slow and gradual process. Pay no attention to those, like, you know, canyons where clearly rushing water just carved them out. You know, when you're at the beach and you see the water come in, and after time it will trace these like grooves in the sand. Like, you get in a plane and you look down at Earth and you see those grooves in the sand that are like 1,000-foot canyons. Yeah, it's that, right? And so Randall Carlson's kind of a rogue geologist. Some of us wonder about some of the things, given that he's also the master mason and stuff like that. But I can put the Scorpio card back away. When I love the guy, and the information that he is sharing is amazing. I've studied geometry through his course and tuned in a bunch to Randall Carlson. And anyway, he speaks so much about the flood, the geological evidence for it, which is everywhere. The clear and known and accepted scientific evidence that there was, in many ice ages, they call this thing, about 12,000 years ago, this is called Younger Dryas period. And we see this in the tree rings, and we see this in the soil layers, and we see this in the ice core samples. And if we're wise, we should see that also in the truth that the kind of genetic work suggests that at one point we, as a species, nearly died. And that all of the megafauna, the giant animals, died at the same time. I mean, like, post-dinosaur, a different level, right? A different comet. Anyway, that's Randall Carlson's theory, and the one that he, through Graham Hancock, is also describing in The Magicians of the God book, which is a really cool book. I suggest reading it. And their theory is this, because that mini ice age started for who knows why and ended for who knows why. Originally, there's this ice spike, cold spike, and then there's this hot spike, and neither of them we can successfully understand using kind of accepted academic approach today. And so what Carlson feels happened is that a comet came. And, you know, he's not the first to go into kind of the celestial mechanics as the source for disaster and cataclysm here on Earth, right? You know, the dinosaur thing was like the dinosaurs, well, some deny dinosaurs, but the death of the dinosaurs as the result of comet was denied for a long time. I could say meteor as well. By the way, the difference of meteor and comets are made with ice mostly, and they come from further out in the Kuiper belt, and asteroids in the asteroid belt mostly, and they can both get bumped in here. And a meteor is when something comes into the atmosphere and becomes what you call a shooting star or fireball, because that's the Earth's atmosphere burning up whatever it is that entered, so it won't hit the Earth. But if the thing is big enough, it will. So either an asteroid, rocky, closer, or a comet, icy, further away, can come all the way in here. They can get pulled, they can get bumped, they can come into our atmosphere and kill us. Jupiter saved our life in the 80s. Check out comet Shoemaker Levy, and Jupiter took one for the team. And I think that happens often, actually. But the theory is that at this time, 12,000 years ago, which happens to align with Plato's quote unquote mythical sinking of Atlantis, that a comet came and hit us. And what happens with comets is they're getting close to the sun. They break up, right? So the sun is melting the ice, the coma. And so we see this amazing tail, and sometimes that gets bright enough for us to have a naked eye sighting of the comet. But then oftentimes the comet itself, especially if it gets stuck in the orbit of a planet, we saw this with Shoemaker Levy. It was orbiting Jupiter for, I think, like a year. And at one point it like broke, and then the pieces came and just like blasted Jupiter. There's still visible scars from that happening in the 80s. So Carlson's theory is that this happened to Earth, and that a piece of this comet hit the huge ice sheet that was in Canada and northern United States then, which we see in the geological record was a mile high, and then it was gone. And so the accepted idea is that very gradually through global warming, although, you know, I'm not sure if it was because people were driving SUVs, anyway, that, you know, climates change. That's not me saying that being like a denier, right? And I'm saying that we as human beings need to get our act together and be earthlings. But I will also say the way that that's being promoted and the reason why, and the idea that you're a virus, is ridiculous. Because the climate's changing on other planets too. We did just send one SUV-sized rover to Mars, so maybe we can blame the polar ice caps melting on Mars, which is happening on that. Or maybe we can get hip and realize that the sun is changing, and that's why every planet in our solar system is changing. And maybe the human being needs an upgrade to be able to live in the world of the next sun, to use old mythic language. And maybe part of this weirdness, like, how do I say this in good words that will keep me from getting erased? Right. So the serpents that live within the cells are being updated through intervention at this time, quite physically, in those who comply. And so maybe that is actually just an update of the monkey suit, as I like to call the human being, to prepare us to survive the energies of the sun to come. I try to be as optimistic a conspiracy theorist as I am a pessimistically aligned one. And I no longer avoid that term conspiracy theorist, although it is used as a weapon for anyone who wants to do research into any themes outside of the mainstream. Because I also believe in a lot of theories that, yes, indeed, there are collections of powerful people who are trying to keep other people from the food and whatnot. So I'm going to try to keep this in a place that can be received, because I know I've already said a lot of words that can really just kind of push people into painful places or angry places or whatever. And for that, I also send love. I absolutely agree that we are a species with amnesia. And I think this idea of like, don't look up is coming from that. I'm so visually inclined that I want to push a button and have it go right to don't look up. But it's not wrong for it to go through all these stages to get there, because they are all related. So the comet story, by the way, we're hit with a comet and it's ice age. But for 1,200 years, and death and pain and like, so we're going to get heavy here, right? Actually, it's eclipse day and I'm going to get pretty shadowy if I haven't already. And I encourage you, if you don't want to go into like a deeper level of a rabbit hole or a painful place, I'd encourage you actually just to stop this now. And if you do, happy, and I mean happy, and sorry if I've made it not so eclipsing to you. We go into the shadow and we bring out new light. And I think in that, it should be clear that I mean this, if it hasn't already been evidenced, but not for the kids in the room either, okay? So the sun went away, because what happens is that ice wall melted, carved out in this great flood, not gradually, instantaneously, these deep canyons, and flooded into the ocean, and the water level raised 400 meters. So think about what happens to California or New York or any coastal anything, gone. And we have found plenty of evidence of underwater cities. Graham Hancock has like a wonderful book. I'm sorry to say I'm forgetting the title, where he himself and his wife Santha is an amazing photographer, went and dove deep and explored many of these artifacts that are now under the sea. There was some time ago a tsunami in India, and you know, before the big wave comes, it pulls all the water away, which is an interesting thing to contemplate and grow through. But before the tidal wave came, it pulled the water out so far that a like underwater city was revealed, and many believe this is what was previously thought of quote unquote mythical city of Krishna. By the way, why do I say quote unquote mythical? Because the way that myth is used in modern times as a word that means untruth is ridiculous. Okay. Oh, sometimes I just rant. So, right. Back to the comet story. So when the ice water floods into the ocean waters raise, and you know, cities are just gone, and obviously those people aren't going to survive. Even before the ice became the fire. So this will happen. I mean, we've seen with much smaller asteroids, even that, or meteors, I should say, because meteors, this could be comet, asteroid, you know, Elon Musk's ego, Tesla falling back, whatever. Anyway, so that a shock wave happens when large bodies enter the atmosphere, planets that have atmospheres, and that can just spread wildfire like all around the entire planet. So, or in local, if it's a smaller thing, like so like the Tunguska event, or I mean, when I was actually first studying astrology at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, my first ever class where I was learning about transits and that, was February 2013, there was a meteor in Russia, fortunately kind of away from any very like densely populated places that caught an entire forest on fire. Not because it hit there directly, but as they come in, fire in the atmosphere happens, right? So before the ice was the fire. And that's written about by many of the ancient civilizations in their so-called myths, where basically there was just this great cataclysm of fire, of ice, fire and water, fire and flood. And 90% plus of humans died, of all things died in that moment. Like the birds might do a little bit better, but the atmosphere on fire, right? The fish, much better. But we surface beings, like unless you were in your bunker, were brought underground, which it said is how many survived. You can look at some of the cities like Derinkuyu, like like 50, I should know, I've been there, but levels underground. I haven't been to the lowest because you're not allowed, okay? But that's in Turkey, in Cappadocia. And they say like people built it to escape the like Christians coming, which is a good idea to escape the Christians coming in those days, but there's no way that people of those times carved out these amazing places, right? It was so close to the newly discovered Göbekli Tepe, which clearly eradicates the very idea of what we are taught about the evolution of consciousness and civilization. It's just done. So if you haven't looked into Göbekli Tepe, please do. In that book I keep referring to, Graham Hancock's Magicians of the Gods, actually begins there. I'm not denying that people like went into Derinkuyu and the other underground cities of Turkey to escape the blades of the Christians at the time, but I bet you they were already there and it was just a convenient place to go. I bet you they were built to just survive the coming comet, which I bet you also was known about and seen. And so Randall Carlson actually believes that it came from this place of the sky. And that's why Algol is known as the demon star, because we watched the world ender slowly approaching from that place of space, and the comet grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it came and set our world on fire and then brought the flood and the ice age that very few people survived. Now, first of all, when everybody dies, we're going to feel it. When everybody's in fear, we're going to feel it. Are you feeling it? Now, in this, can you feel it? So we're told of some old stories, and not only from one source, that there was once only one language on Earth, and then we were separated by many languages. I believe many languages is the mind and the words itself, and that the one language was that empathic, more intuitive, telepathic, if you will, connection that we still can share through the wisdom of our heart and empathy. But I think we were much more alive in that design back in the day before, well, let me just leave that there. So those who survived are the ones who actually experienced not the death of self, but the death of all beings. Now, there would have been people holding on. I mean, this is terrible places to go, but, holding on to a tree as the water's rising and watching their family, succumb to the ocean and dying, and then they die. Like it's not like it happened in an instant. For some people, so blessings for those to whom it did. For those who absolutely survived, what a blessing and what a curse. Because 1,200 years of ice age. And the tech is gone, right? I mean, you might have been pulled down under by other beings who live inside the earth. We have plenty of stories like that. The Hopi tell us about the ant friends and the ant people who helped them survive these calamities. Some of the Lakota tradition, from what I heard, and I don't come from these traditions, so it's all hearsay, okay, but say that they also came up out of the earth in what today is called the Black Hills in South Dakota. because they had gone under to survive. You can read in Peru about Viracocha, who created humanity, then put them underground, and then his children walked north from Bolivia, like calling up the humans out from underground to be on Earth. So many stories like this of surviving for like generations below the ground. 1200 years is this accepted date. So I want to kind of, I'll get back here, but so the comet comes, fire and ice, and when the water, this freezing ice water hits the Atlantic, Randall Carlson explains that that's basically like the what's it called? The thermostat for the Earth. And so it was stuck on freezing. And so then it's just white out. Like you can't see the sun. And I could show that to you in many of the myths as well, like the missing sun and coyotes and all sorts of things. And then 1200 years later, there's this heat spike that nobody can explain. And what Randall Carlson feels happened is that this part of this comet's still circling the Earth. In fact, parts of that comet are still to this day circling the Earth, and they are, in Randall Carlson's eyes, the toroid meteor shower, which are the remnants of this comet that came to kill us, but didn't, and then came to save us, quote unquote. And that, you know, the radix of that meteor shower is here in the constellation of the Bull. And so Carlson believes that it literally was coming from Algol in space, and we witnessed this for a long time. And so that Algol then became identified with our destruction. Now, whether that's true or not, we have not even like written evidence of that one, but I think it's an interesting tale. He also believes that it happened around Halloween time, Samhain, because he believes that, like the coyotes and the foxes of the old stories, those with bushy tails, that the witch on the broomstick, and I don't want to offend any of y'all practicing in that craft, but is the comet, which is coyote, fox. So that's an interesting thing. Algol is just off screen. This is the foot of Perseus who stands on the Pleiades. So Algol's up above, by the way. But I wanted to show this image, this photo I took last year, because we had this wild card of a comet come around. Now, it wasn't long before then, and I actually predicted we would see this when Uranus moved into Taurus, right? Calamities of heaven to earth is the symbolism there. We actually found evidence of this gigantic crater in the Atlantic Ocean, in Greenland, that likely could be the crater where this comet hit. So 1200 years later, another piece of the comet, which has been circling the Earth the whole time, comes and hits Earth once again, but this time in the Pacific Ocean. And that causes this very rapid greenhouse global warming event. And we go back to, you know, the ability to live on the surface of the Earth without, you know, being ice survivors. So the last thing I want to say, and I want to try to say this quickly because it's a very long story, but I've already ranted enough and I don't want to bring too much pain before this thing. But you can see shadow before light. So, you know, in your day today, or maybe this week, this month, maybe this year, coming into this Algol eclipse, maybe you too have been called into some of your kind of, more twisted contemplations, and may there be light on the other side. But I think some of the light, as we've seen in our own personal work, is to go look into the shadow, look into the pain, look into the traumas of our youth, perhaps traumas of past lives, perhaps traumas in the species. If it's true that we are composed of materials that were formed in the explosions of stars, perhaps back to those explosions, you know what I mean? But this thing right here on Earth, on our planet, we all died, but not all of us. And woe to those who survived. When you look at the many sages who came back to the earth to bring the knowledge, and that's these magicians of the gods that Graham Hancock's speaking about in this text, because, you know, it's Osiris and Isis, it's Quetzalcoatl, it's the shining ones, all over in the traditions, the teachers came. Hancock promotes the idea that Göbekli Tepe itself, like many of these sacred sites on Earth, were actually teaching centers where they were helping humans who would survive this 1200-year ice age hell to become civilized again, to become good again. And you will hear in all these myths, okay, these are going to be heavy words: stop eating each other, no more cannibalism, and stop raping each other. And you know what? Consider getting married, and here's some seeds, and this is how you plant them. And you know, agriculture today cannot explain why the original seeds, when at the advent of agriculture, according to our sociological and historical record, were already genetically advanced. Riddle me that. Soil in South America. There's much more to say about that. There's so much evidence, not only of an ancient culture before the calamity, like the Great Pyramid, who had a wisdom that we have not even come close to, but also that at a time, once we survived this, that teachers came. Where did they come from? So many promote that these are extraterrestrials. But I prefer the idea that no, they were quite human. However, they were the human that lived in safe spaces. And so maybe underground, maybe in space. And when the Earth was ready, which required the comet to strike again. I mean, if they were in space and still technologically advanced, maybe they even influenced that comet to come hit the ocean and cause the global warming situation that allowed us to to live like a healthy life again, not eat one another and consider agriculture and, you know, animal husbandry, as they call it, and all these things, right? And marriage and, you know, math. So stars, astrology, science, consideration, being with the stars, like these truths. But is being with the stars meaning that because Ptolemy said this about Algol, then that's the demon star? And let me just look for as many charts as I can where people were beheaded when the sun or the moon or the ascendant was aligned to Algol. Now, I have seen, I shared this example last night that kind of came in through a conversation with a friend in the group, which was that, like, Muhammad Ali, interestingly, Uranus on Algol, and, you know, he died with Parkinson's, right? Like, greatest fighter of all time, but also like got punched too many times and punched a lot of people. And so, like, a kind of idea of beheading through brain damage is interesting, right? So we see these things in astrological symbolism coming to Earth. I don't want to deny that, but I think we also need to be careful by saying, oh, this is what this thing is. I don't know why I do is because that's what the ancients said so. And then I'm going to apply that. And especially if it's just something that I'm applying to terrify people, right? Now, am I a hypocrite? This has been a very terrifying rant that I'm on right now. Shadow and then light. Because if we refuse to look at our traumas, then disaster. They just operate us from hidden places and we live life not in a good way. Like, that's the point of healing. And we need to do that on a cultural level. We need to do that on a species-wide level. Should we do it the way that the TV is telling me to? Or should we maybe entertain some of the ways that are getting, I don't know, erased by those who have all the gazillions? Who are those? So let me just use these words that might keep this thing alive. I don't know that that's happening already, because lots of things are getting buried now. To why? And why don't look up? Because you got to stay asleep. Don't look at the trauma. Don't look at the demon. Push it away, right? And so let's just get our brains working. Let's get all the digital things, right? Let's like do everything we can to keep us from looking at the trauma of our youth or the trauma of our species. An active ploy, or maybe just a subconscious necessity so we can survive without going back to these terrible, painful things. But if we don't, then the soul remains split. And so we see this happening. Perhaps you, like me, have been through some of this reclaiming self by revisiting our traumas, taking back the light that was lost in eclipse at those times of deep pain and shadow and trauma and just terror, right? But what if that's happening for the whole species? What is the result of a species who has suppressed their traumas so deeply and won't look at them? Oh, it's called patriarchy, to use one word. There's other words I'd prefer, but, you know, do with that what you will. It's called the illness of the earth. And it's also called, well, I'll say the powers that shouldn't be, who I believe actually, like the control system and empire and those who are going to make the rules, for what you can and cannot do, and tell you how you can help the earth at their own profit, how you can eat ants while they're eating whatever they want, how you will have no ownership over anything and be happier than you ever were by the year 2030. And it's written clearly in the documents. Anyway, that like these cats literally, like there were those who survived with the technology, and I think probably in space and maybe like on the moon and places where you could, I mean, it's 1200 years, but with their eyes on the earth, wanting to come home. Now, generation one, you're looking down at these people who are surviving on earth and you're like, oh my God, it's so terrible. We need to save them. These are our brothers and our sisters, like literally, and family, and there's nothing you can do. But you're watching. And then, you know, 2 generations later, oh, those are like my grandparents' brothers and sisters. So like, how do you do that? It's my great second removed 7 generations later, those fucking heathens down there who are eating each other and like ruining the planet that was once ours. And we have to, you know, correct them. Now there's going to be divisions there. There's going to be people who still love these beings who are having to go through these terrible things. These are the watchers, by the way. And then there's going to be people who feel like they are literally a different species now. On some levels they are. And so when the other comet hits again, or maybe is redirected, the other piece that brings the warmth and we're ready to kind of come back to Earth, you're either going to have to eradicate these like Mad Max cannibalistic, like just terror zone rape people, or you're going to have to educate them. And I think both of those practices were used and are being used. And that is the terror. That is the virus, not you. And the people who stayed here, even though we had to do these terrible things, are the ones that felt in like their heart the death of the species and had it hard and grew in ways, and there's maybe even deeper levels to suppress, were the ones that kind of survived. In other places they were going through terrors and hardships too, but in a very different way. And that we are both of these things in every way. We are the controllers, we are the controlled. For me, that's what's alive at this time of the Medusa blood moon and the Scorpion's heart. Diamond ring, that beautiful symbol of the marriage of spirit and soul. So let's end it here in matter and in a good way. Thank you if you've survived that eclipse and journeyed into the shadow with me, for choosing to look. And I would love to look as well at the story that you have to share, and what you are feeling in your bones is the seed of this plant that has sprouted from unhealthy soil. Because if we want to help get right personally, we have to face these things, these contaminants, and clean up. If we want to do that in a family system together, sometimes that's not available. And so we do what we can individually, though typically that will separate us from the family, but we understand, we know we are doing it for them and for those who came before us, and that the ancestors are rooting for us. Culturally, but should we pray the way that those who run the corporations tell us to? Should we go through the rituals that are being done by the senators? should we take the great healing gifts of big pharma? I don't think I'll say yes or no, but maybe you can feel my answer. Like, it is crazy what is happening to people's minds in this, like, just deep fear spread. Wise beings, I'm seeing. And I'm not saying I'm immune to that, right? Look what's happening to me. This is a place I've been for, oh, what year is it? 11 years now. and in different ways, and growing through it, I believe, and working on my own healing and sometimes my own escapism. But I do feel that even this discovery of that crater I spoke of before is a willingness of collective consciousness of humanity to remember and have a soul retrieval by releasing the amnesia, looking up once again, looking within once again, and cleaning up on idle self and idle society, you know? There's an old African proverb which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it is my prayer that I will stay courageous enough to look at the shadow and see light reborn and do my personal work. There's been times in my life when I was like right in it, times in my life when I'm running away from it full speed. It is my prayer that if I choose to courageously commit to my own feeling, healing, knowing, and growing, I will by default call to me community of fellow feeler, healer, knower, growers. And then that is the beautiful wildfire that will spell in my conscious experience, and that these communities of consciousness arising all over the world in giving us the opportunity to together go far. And I believe this eclipse at the eye of the Gorgon, moving into the sacred hoop where we come from, and this eclipse, the heart of the scorpion, and passing its tail, which points to the center of the galaxy and the place we will go, are giving us this opportunity for accelerated growth by looking into the shadow of the old to bring forth light of the new. I have a project with my dear friend Eric Deutsch, master pianist, who you are about to hear from. A 7-minute song that we together created for this eclipse. And the way it works is we have a system where I turn, and I'm certainly not the first to, signs into notes. And then I give him a palette of available notes for him to play based upon typically a birth chart, because we do this for natal charts. It's a way that people can experience their astrological imprint and roadmap, not just in all these words, right? And then I give Eric like a general tale and specific aspect groups of tension and release and harmonic translations, and then symbols to help guide the production, like coyotes gather in a circle and musically howl for hours at a high full moon as it is eclipsed by Earth's shadow and turns blood red. Now, by the way, I'll probably experience that tonight because the coyotes are real right now. Sometimes they're a little bit more out there. But the symbol main thing here was a breathtakingly erotic goddess. Let's remember the Scorpio Taurus axis is sensuality and sexuality and life and embodiment, right? So I'm not afraid to bring erotic into this mix. In fact, I think it demands it. The erotic goddess removing her head from her shoulders, cradling it like a baby in the comfort of her arms, and singing a hauntingly beautiful song about the transformation of caterpillar to butterfly. That cradling as a baby is so important. And let me end there so I can at least try to offer some love after what you might have experienced as hate and fear, because I am afraid. Which is this: you can see the patriarchy as the evil king, or you can see it as the sobbing, actually not sobbing because forgotten how to cry, the little boy who was never held right. If you're still here, you're with me. And I encourage you to lay down and close your eyes, or you can keep them open, because on this screen, you're about to see an entire eclipse, from full to blood and full again, light into shadow and the light reborn, while you listen to this 7-minute soul song by Eric. By the way, geminibrett.com/sessions. You can find a way to sign up for a soul song of your own, where I will create harmony notes and symbolic suggestions of your natal chart, and Eric will record about a 12-minute song on solo piano. And he is a master, as you are about to hear if you have not heard his music before. If you want to hear more of Eric, hammerandstring.com. So either watch the screen and watch the eclipse as you receive the sounds, or lay down. And I will be doing this hand on heart, hand on belly, maybe hand on neck. And just allow this music to bring shadow and light in a profound way that my limited words never could. Happy eclipsing to you. We grow through what we go through. And it's tricky out there right now, but this is just the storm before the calm. See you in space, friends. And thanks to Eric for that beautiful music. So once again, Eric Deutsch, you can find at hammerandstring.com. You can search Eric's name with a K, Eric, Deutsch, at like YouTube or online and find all sorts of amazing music Eric's played. Oh, with Dixie Chicks and Charlie Hunter. And so, I mean, I shouldn't even start because it's like an endless list. But check out his music. It's wonderful. And I'm really excited to be able to align with this dear brother of mine and create these soul songs, as we call them. So I'd love to hear, by the way, in the comments below, like what happened for you during that music. And maybe I should have played it before the whole rant. I want to come back into just this chart and say one more thing. Although, you know, I had a plan and now it's gone. The original plan was to just end this thing as soon as the music ended, and I'm wishing I had, because then I had some insight and it has gone as quickly as it arrived. And that's the nature of the eclipse. When it comes back, it'll be much stronger. Oh, right, I just noticed this while watching that eclipse on the screen. So I shared before that one of my recent revelations is how the phases of the moon are backwards, right? So it goes from full to new to full again, but on its way from new to full, you actually get the waning phases. On the way from full to new, you get the waxing phases. It's like fully backwards. But this is what I just noticed watching that. Like the moon, we see, as you know, the same face of the moon like all year long, right? There's a very slight kind of wobbling where we can start seeing, I guess, what I call like a kind of around the sides of the hidden places, not to the dark side of the moon, that's ridiculous, but to the far side of the moon, as we should more properly call it. And there's this kind of moon wobbling thing, which is wonderful to explore. But what I just noticed in that video is, unlike normal moon phase, where the moon, it's not that the same face isn't waxing and waning during the eclipse, but the way that where the crescents are on the surface of the moon, I think there are things happening in the eclipse that are impossible to happen through what I'll call like natural phases. And I have to explore that for some time, but I think I just saw in the face of that moon, on that video watching that eclipse, that it did something that you cannot see on the face of the moon otherwise. So I'm gonna have to investigate that for some time. The other thing I found out recently, which I love, and this has to do with what you may know as the parallax calculation for the moon, or topocentric calculation for the moon. Astrology, we're measuring the moon and all things not from the surface of the earth where we live, breathe, witness these heavenly happenings, and for most of you and me are born, but rather from the center of the earth, which is on one level a lovely thing because it's the one place where we are all connected. And it very clearly shows us this truth, that the way that astrology is working energetically, yes, it's happening to you and me, and I really encourage having a visual experience with the heavens too, but it's really happening to the center of Earth, and then she gives it to all of her earthlings. So if you are in a place on Earth where you can't see the eclipse, just because you don't see it doesn't mean you won't be it. And for the solar eclipse coming up, that's all of us, because it's like only in Antarctica. There's some people there, and I don't know if they'll see it in the bases down there. If it's daytime and you can't see a lunar eclipse, I really encourage you to sit with the sun at your back and look at your shadow and journey your shadow to the center of Earth and just kind of create an eclipse vision and be with the whole planet as we're going through this transformation together. What I realized recently, so there's one thing I love about lunar eclipses, is that like it's this heavenly event that anywhere, if clouds allow, and once again, it's this a definite no here. I'm so sad about it, but that's cool. So I will dream and experience the eclipse in that space where I'm probably more fluid anyway. But yeah, so what I one thing I love about lunar eclipses or solar eclipses, though, solar eclipses are available to many fewer observers and in fewer places on the earth. Like for the lunar eclipse, it's half of the earth, it's night, right? Even more, because some of the places that were day will become night before the eclipse ends, and some of the places that were, well, that's the only one. Okay, so it's a little bit more than half the earth can experience any lunar eclipse. And so we get these photographs from all over the world of this amazing happening in the same moment of time, but different perspectives. And this is a thing I've just recently learned by really exploring the difference of parallax calculation, where we look at the moon not from the center of Earth, but where we can look at the moon from the surface of Earth. I learned this during a blood moon in 2014, actually, which is that the chart had shown me this one time, but what's actually happening where I am is slightly different. And that's because I don't live in the center of the Earth. I live on the surface and I'm watching from there. And the time is a little bit different. This is called parallax because the moon's close enough to Earth that that distance from the center in comparison to the distance of the moon to the surface is enough that we actually see the moon in a different place in the sky, and that the eclipse has slightly different timing. And we can be off to like 40 minutes off. And this means actually, what this is like, what's new for me is that though we will see these pictures of like the total or near total lunar eclipse moment from many places on Earth, and I'm going to depend on those pictures tonight. So the same celestial event being experienced in different ways, like the moon will have different tilts from all these different places. So same moment experienced in this different ways in all these different spaces. But what I just realized is actually slightly different times as well, because the timing of the eclipse is slightly different depending on where you are on Earth's surface. And so even more, I'll go back to the wisest thing I've said today, because it's not mine. It's this old proverb, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Thank you for spending some time with me here, friends. I would love to hear what this opened for you. I would love for you to teach me and add your information. So please use the comment sections here. Otherwise, reach out if you've liked this video or disliked it in a way that you feel others should also dislike it. Please share it around. Tell me what went right and what went wrong. And I will see you in space. Happy, and I mean it, eclipsing to you, friends. New light from the shadow of the old.